This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Beginning today's show is the 2024 Gardiner Lecturer speaker, Per Ederer, as he discusses livestock and meat production for a global society in this two-segment interview. Per explains the Dublin Declaration, why meat is important for society, and he takes the time to mention many aspects of how livestock impacts the environment. He also says how Kansas farmers and ranchers are supporting the global society. K-State Horticulture Extension Specialist Cynthia Domenghini in today's show discussing how to add interest to the home landscape with seasonal flowers, pumpkins, gourds, and corn. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our show talking with the founder and director of Goal Sciences, who is also the 2024 Gardiner Lecturer speaker, Per Ederer. Per, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me here.
Per, talking a little bit about who you are and why you're here at K-State today.
So I'm a global food system scientist. I've been doing this since a couple of decades. And several years ago, I started looking at the role that animals should play in a global food system from a nutrition point of view, from an environmental point of view, and also from an ethical point of view. And so this led to a number of different scientific alliances that I became part of. And ultimately, the scientific work that I've been doing over the last years got attention around the world. I'm from Europe, based in Switzerland. And so that is how I got invited to the Gardiner Lecturer.
And Per, talking a little bit about the company that you're founder and director of, Goal Sciences, and why is that something you took the time and energy to start?
So Goal Sciences stands for Global Observatory on Accurate Livestock Sciences. So a number of years ago, I observed that in this space around livestock sciences, we're dealing with a huge amount of manipulations, misinformation, and quite frankly, just misunderstandings. So some of the reasons why is because the scientific evidence, the data that is available, is very large, very complex, very difficult to deal with. And so I started this research center to explicitly deal with large data issues in order to distill and synthesize better answers, better analysis, better insights.
What are some things you've been working on?
So we've been working on, for instance, on the question of how does food move through the food system? So how does biomass? So we have all these crops in the world, and then these crops get processed or they become fed to animals, and how do they end up being food? So all behind that is our huge data issues. So in my team, I have a team of 10 researchers, and half of them are data scientists and half of them are agronomists. So we always work with very large data science in order to get to the core of what we can see from the data.
And you're not based here in the United States of America, as you noted. So why is the work that what you're doing over there really important for the whole world?
So in my team, we're taking a global perspective. So everything we do, we always do it for every country in the world. So when you go on our website, you can get the analysis for every country in the world, for all 235 countries. And so we just take a global perspective. We all live on the same planet. There is no such thing as an agriculture that is not affected by what's going on in the world. And so it is our analytical lens to be looking at the global development. Food security is a global issue. Climate is a global issue. Our ability to raise the right type of animals is a global issue. So we take this global approach.
And something else you're a part of, the Dublin Declaration, and can you share how that has a global impact and what it is?
So the Dublin Declaration came about because a number of scientists, basically 3 years ago, we we decided that we need to take a more concentrated approach to combat all this amount of misinformation that's going on. So we created a conference in Dublin in October 2022, in order to kind of bring together the best available science that we could find and present it in a 2-day conference. And with all the co-authors and all the presenters of that conference, we also issued that Dublin Declaration. The Dublin Declaration, it's a 1-page document. In essence, it says that livestock is a very important part of the global food system, and it is so important that it needs to be treated only on the basis of scientific evidence, not on the basis of articles of faith or ideologies or estimations, but we need to stick extremely close to what the scientific evidence says so that we can get to the right solutions of how to create a sustainable livestock system as a part of the global food system. And so we created this declaration, and we asked scientists from around the world to sign it if they believe in what's written in that declaration. And so more than 1,200 scientists have signed the Dublin Declaration. We curated every single signature. You are only allowed to sign if you are proven to be an independent researcher. If you're a scientist at a company, I'm sure we will do wonderful work, but you are not allowed to sign the Dublin Declaration. You must be an independent researcher, an independent scientist to be allowed to sign.
How have you seen the community around the Dublin Declaration impact global food systems and animal sciences?
We have seen, I would say, 2 impacts. The most important impact that we actually wanted to look for was to give voice to all the scientists around the world who are doing fantastic work, but who often feel lonely in their universities, in their departments, who feel like, am I the only one who is actually thinking these things? So with this Dublin Declaration, scientists, researchers all around the world, they can feel comfortable that they're not the only ones. There is at least 1,200 other colleagues from around the world who are willing to back them up if they speak up on behalf of the scientific evidence. So we have seen a lot more scientists around the world being more forthcoming, being more courageous in publishing and speaking about their scientific evidence for livestock, around livestock, because they now feel like they're part of a larger community that's going to back them up. So that was the most important aim of the declaration, and we achieved that. Secondly, I would say in every senior policy capital of the world, whether that's Washington, D.C., Brussels in Europe, Canberra in Australia, Sao Paulo in Brazil. So ministerial, agricultural, policymakers, they know about the Dublin Declaration. They've seen and heard about it. They have become more careful to actually curate and listen to the scientific evidence as they make their policies. And so we also feel that is an important achievement to give policymakers a tool, an instrument of where science that they can rely on.
So as farmers and ranchers could be talking to people about their livestock and meat production, when it comes to nutrition, what are a few key points that you think are really important that they take the time to share?
So on nutrition for humans, right, for people, somehow there has been a narrative that's gaining more and more ground that meat and red meat in particular would be detrimental to your health. And we, as the initiators and co-authors behind the Dublin Declaration, we think that narrative is outright false. We have strong scientific evidence to back us up that meat is an essential part of a healthy and nourishing diet. Now, if you don't want to eat meat for whatever reasons, then at least you should eat dairy and eggs or fish. But meat is simply the most robust and easiest, and in many ways even the most cost-effective way to ensure that you have critical micronutrients. These are proteins, fatty acids, amino acids, vitamins. So we thoroughly believe that meat and red meat in particular is an important, essential part of a regular diet. And we present the scientific evidence to that effect.
How do you see the animal meat production, really important to the environment then?
Now, the environment is a far more complex issue. First of all, there's 4 independent dimensions of environmental impact, and they need to be independently evaluated. So one impact is on biodiversity. One impact is on the whole water cycle, the hydrology. The third impact is on land utilization, and the fourth impact is on climate.
That was the 2024 Gardiner Lecture speaker, Per Ederer. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but when we come back, we'll once again be joined by Per. And if you're reaching your destination and aren't going to be able to hear the rest of today's conversation with Per, you can always find it by going to agtoday.net or by locating it on your podcast streaming platform of choice. We're now cutting to that short break. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we continue our show with the 2024 Gardiner Lecture speaker, Per Ederer. Per, continuing our conversation, discussing how the animal and meat products impact the environment.
Different animal production systems have different negative and positive impacts along all of these 4 dimensions. And so we need to look at different animal production systems and their respective positive or negative impacts on all of these. So that makes it just a very complex picture. And so to say, in principle, all meat production is, for instance, produces too much greenhouse gases and therefore impacts the climate negatively, is just a far, far, far too simplified sentence. Because, for instance, in poultry production, the impact on greenhouse gas emissions is absolutely negligible. The big greenhouse gas driver, of course, is for cattle because of the methane emissions. But even there, the picture is quite differentiated, whether you have grazing cattle, whether you have dairy cattle, whether you have grazing and or feedlot, and so on. Whether you do the cattle ranching and the methods of the cattle ranching, whether you get carbon sequestration effects, and now this is only talking about climate. Now then let's talk about water, and then we need to talk about biodiversity. So it is just a very complex subject, and we need to pay attention to that complexity, and we need to stop utilizing short simplifications that will lead to wrong solutions.
So how do you see livestock play into the health of a global society when it comes to sustainable food systems?
So we have 235 different territories in this world, and each one of them faces different climatic conditions, different biological conditions, different social, different economic conditions. So if you are the city of Singapore and you have no arable land at all because you're sitting on a small island, you are facing a completely different food system. If you are China, if you are India, if you are Bangladesh, if you are Malawi in the center of Africa, if you're Paraguay in South America. So every country has its own challenges, its own starting points of what it needs to have a sustainable food system. And not every country is going to be able to be autonomous or should be autonomous in its food production, because some countries are blessed with huge amounts of arable and grazable land, and other countries are not. So we need free trade in food systems in order to be able to produce the food where we can produce it best with the least amount of environmental impact, and export and trade that food to those places where it's not. So that's already the first thing. And then, again, every country, every region needs to balance its geological and soil and biological and economic and social conditions in order to arrive at its optimal sustainable livestock production system. There is no one-size-fits-all answer. There is not even 10 sizes-fits-all answers. We have thousands of different micro-solutions that work perfectly well in one situation and would be a disaster in the other. So we need to localize our solutions.
Are there things that Kansas farmers, ranchers could be doing to help support the global food system or advocating for?
So Kansas is an interesting place in the world. It has a very rich history of producing food, along with all the other Great Plains states. Has been actually a much overlooked foundation of the wealth of the United States, because it has been here where all this food has been grown. So, and then that has been shipped to the coastal regions in order to feed all the urban populations, right? So you can't have a New York City, you cannot have a Chicago City survive without having farmers producing all that food for them, right? And Kansas has been, in a way, a historical, very prototypical place of farmers who have always been at the forefront of technology, of using the very latest genetic technologies for both crops and animals in order to produce all this food that the cities are consuming. So the lesson here is for Kansas farming community is to stay the course. Always keep on using the very latest technology, the very latest science that makes you being able to produce the food in both quality and quantity and in terms of environmental performance that the rest of the country and to some degree even the rest of the world needs. Because here the Great Plains states, they are one of the food baskets of the world, and that is also part of your responsibility as the Kansas farming community to ensure that it stays one of the food baskets of the world.
And Per, your lecture for the Gardiner series is titled Scientific Evidence Behind the Role of Livestock and Meat Production in a Global Society, which people will be able to go watch a video of once this has gone out. So what are a few points you're talking about that might make listeners want to go listen to that as well?
So I'm going to make a couple of points in terms of which scientific evidences we feel very strongly about. So first of all, I already mentioned we feel strongly about that meat and dairy and eggs, but particularly also meat and red meat in particular also should be part of the regular diet of the people. And I'm going to talk about that at the lecture. I will also be talking about how essential it is to have grazing animals to be part of a healthy, biodiverse environment. Healthy, the grazing animals, grazing ruminants, and they could be cattle, it could be sheep, could be goats, are an essential part of maintaining ecological balance. And that is usually overlooked by both the regulatory environment and the farming environment as well. So we need to make better efforts to integrate the grazing animal into our ecology, into our environment. I will be talking about that this silly old saying that because of the feed conversion ratios that we should rather be eating the crops ourselves as humans then feeding it to the animals and going through another trophic level, as they say, because then we would be losing all this energy. So it is amazing how this misconception has gotten this far, that by now everybody seems to know that it's inefficient to be feeding animals. And it's just simply not right. It's just simply not right. You need to look at the numbers the right way, and then you will understand why it makes sense to be growing a crop and feeding it to an animal and then to eat that animal. And I finally will also be talking about some of the values that we as the farming community and the scientists that are serving that farming community, that we stand for. Values of strength, of independence, of science and knowledge and education. These are some of these very strong traditional values of farming communities, and how these values are under attack. It's not just that the animals are under attack. It's not just that the farming community is under attack. The values that the farming community stands for, they are under attack.
Per, if people want to find out more information about the work you're doing, how can they do that?
So on my website called goalsciences.org, you can find more information there. You can read our articles that are written for a common audience, so they're non-scientific articles, in the Animal Frontiers journal. The one was from April of 2023. There are all these different topics are being laid out with all the scientific evidence. There will be another Animal Frontiers issue coming out in February 2025, where we'll be talking a lot about this. And I would also highlight maybe one of my colleagues' websites, Aleph, ALEPH 2020.org. So on aleph2020.org, you can also retrieve loads and loads of information that has been presented for a common audience, to be understood by a common audience, not a scientific audience.
Per, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thank you very much for having me here.
That was Per Ederer, founder and director of Goal Sciences and the 2024 Gardiner Lecture speaker. I will put a link in today's show notes on agtoday.net if you would like to hear his lecture. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more ahead.
From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. As leaves begin to fall and Halloween decorations start going up, many people are wondering how they can keep some color and interest in their home landscapes. K-State instructor and horticulture extension specialist Cynthia Domenghini has several decorating ideas that involve the use of seasonal flowers, pumpkins, gourds, and dried corn stalks and corn bundles. Cynthia talking about decorating for fall with the garden, and there really are a number of things that we can do this time of year that move that stuff along to maybe more the front of the house or even inside the house.
Sure. Now, if you are still interested in doing some planting, you may notice the garden centers have out the typical pansies and chrysanthemums, maybe even some ornamental kale. Those kinds of things can be planted this time of year to add some fall color. But there's also pumpkins and gourds and things like that that you can bring home and do some decorating on your porch or even in your landscape.
I know the pumpkin's the one thing we need to think about is we really need, if it's for decoration, other than trying to scare people, we need to make sure that it stays whole, right?
Right. Yeah, they're going to last a lot longer if you leave them whole. Carving your pumpkins is fun, and that's great, but just know that they're only going to last a few days to a week, maybe before they really start to rot. So when you're choosing those pumpkins, you want to look for one that is a solid color so that you know that it was ready to be harvested when it was picked. And if you feel the outside of the pumpkin, check for soft spots. You don't want to pick a pumpkin that's got any soft spots or it's going to rot more quickly.
Any tips or tricks on how we can make them not look like just a pumpkin sitting out in the open?
Oh, sure, yeah. As you're cleaning up your fall garden, at least for me, I've got a bunch of container plants growing on my front porch. So as those die back with the frost, or even just as they start to look sad with the extended summer weather, and I'm cutting some of those back, you can actually do some really decorative touches on your porch by adding height to your pumpkin display. Put the pumpkin on top of the empty container, for example, or the container filled with soil to add some height to your display, and then stack different colored pumpkins around them. There's all kinds of ways that you can spruce up the front porch with that fall color.
Mixing the gourds in as well. And I think one of the things that I kind of forget is it's not just kind of that off-white gourd. There's a number of colors that you can choose from.
Absolutely, yes. There's shades of greens and yellows and oranges, even some with some different textures to them, kind of warty-like textures. You'll see those on the pumpkins, too. It's fun to integrate a bunch of different colors, unless you have a different decorative touch, maybe going more monochromatic, and that's up to each person's decision.
I know there's also some things that we can do inside to add some color as well.
Well, we bring pumpkins indoors. That's one option. Keep an eye out in your landscape as some of your ornamental grasses, for example, maybe start to change to brown and kind of get dried. You can snip off some of those blades of grass and you can put together a really nice fall arrangement that would look lovely on a table. That's one option to consider. Chrysanthemums can come inside and they'll look very nice as well.
Some people make wreaths as well.
Of course, yes. I've seen a lot of people doing artificial wreaths, which is an option, but you can use dried plant material to create a really lovely wreath that could be indoors or outdoors.
We also look at corn stalks and maybe even hay bales.
Right. There's a lot of pumpkin patches and places around town that have corn stalks for sale. You can buy a bundle of stalks and put them on display on your porch, or dried corn bundled up, and usually like groups of 3 or so can make a really lovely display.
Really a great time to get outside, be creative, and who knows what you'll come up with, right?
Yeah, spend some time searching for inspiration, but really the best recommendation I have is to walk through your landscape and look at how it's progressing naturally towards fall and see if you can mimic that with your display. That'll create a really lovely look.
That's Cynthia Domenghini, a K-State instructor and horticulture extension specialist with information on fall decorating with the garden. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.